Thanks, everyone, for joining us here at the Project Censored radio show. We're very glad right now to be joined by Palta, a member of Unity and Struggle, an anti-state communist collective. He's also a forest defender, an immigrant, and lifelong Georgian, and has been involved in this movement for over a year now, with a background in labor organizing prior to working with Stop Cop City and Defend Atlanta Forest. Palta, thanks so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So I wanted to start off right now with the most recent charges, the RICO charges that were brought against 61 folks a few weeks ago. And I was wondering if you could sort of contextualize where we're at in that fight for folks who haven't read the indictment. I mean, it'd be funny if it weren't actually a thing that was being thrown at people. But if you read the indictment, it kind of sounds like an ad for mutual aid and anarchism, because the government's basically saying, and they believe in solidarity and supporting each other and mutual aid. And I'm like, I mean, first, you're not wrong. And secondly, I'm sorry, what's the bad part? So I was wondering, Palta, can you contextualize what's going on here and how Stop Cop City and Defend Atlanta Forest are responding?
So yeah, I mean, to your point, it kind of reads more like a political manifesto. And mind you, I kind of like amateurish one, but that's the state trying to understand anarchism, right? Than an actual like legal document. But yeah, I mean, basically what's going on here, like you said, 61 folks are being like indicted under Georgia's Racketeering, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations Act. There's actually been a recent update in which the indicted individuals be arraigned on November 6th, 2023. But there is no like actual date in which the RICO indictees will need to turn themselves in. So that's like one part of the update of what's going on. Another thing to like mention is that, right now, like legal stuff is being like organized. There is like a robust legal support structure, both of lawyers and of activists that, are providing some other forms of support for the people there. And yeah, there's lots of preparation, because right now there is no clear like timeline of when folks are supposed to turn themselves in. Mind you, like for folks that don't know, like Georgia right now, specifically like the Fulton County the district attorney's office is dealing with now 3 RICO cases. So Stop Cop City, YSL, Free YSL, and of course the Trump one. So there's a lot of like stretched capacity right now. So a lot of the kind of, RICO procedure stuff is very muddled and very like unclear from what I've heard. And it kind of just reflects the lack of capacity of the state right now, because they're dealing with 3 like RICO cases. Like they're putting a lot on their plate. So that's basically the updates in terms of like what's going on timeline wise. I guess I can like talk a little bit specifically about the RICO itself, like what the document contains. You mentioned a little bit of it. But yeah, it's a whole mess, to be honest with you. Like I said earlier, it reads more like a political manifesto than like a neutral legal document. And I put that in quotes because no legal document is really neutral. They do kind of support the ideologies of the state or the structures of the state itself. But yeah, there's some like glaring errors. Like one big one is like on who owns the land, and that's like literally like the first paragraph of the indictment, in which like the RICO states that the APF owns the land of the forest, which is actually not true. It's the city of Atlanta, and they're leasing the land to APF.
And sorry, what's APF stand for?
Oh, right. The Atlanta Police Foundation. It is like a corporate funded kind of like nonprofit police advocacy group that it strong arms politicians to give more money to cops. And it's also most notably funded the surveillance infrastructure that exists in Atlanta right now, which is one of the most surveilled cities in the United States. So yeah, that's APF. Their RICO was wrong about who owns the land. Like you said, kind of in like the intro, the document seems to like use mutual aid and solidarity as parts of the conspiracy, and it's kind of troubling in many ways because, you know, it condemns these ideas, right? These are like one, I mean, yes, they list it as anarchists. Like, I'm an anarchist, so I also obviously believe in this. But, you know, mutual aid and solidarity aren't just exclusive ideas. You know, like, no one group owns that. It's derived from anarchist texts, sure, but like, I mean, we believe in mutual aid regardless of your political affiliation. Solidarity, I mean, what's going on with the UAW strike right now, right? That's solidarity. That's not a criminal act, right? But it is troubling that the state is using these terms as forms of part of like the what's the quote that they put, an overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. It's troubling, you know, because like you could be giving gas money to somebody and that's an overt act that furthers the conspiracy. You can give someone a free meal, right? And that framing is really dangerous because it literally criminalizes movement, just movement in general, whatever that looks like. And that points to a really fascistic turn. I mean, granted, the United States has never been good, but you know, it's getting worse, right? But yeah, another thing to probably mention that's really critical is just like the date that they said this movement started, which again, it's factual errors galore here between the land stuff and now this. They said that this movement started the day that George Floyd was murdered, and that's just like not true. For one, like the movement started around April or May of 2021 when activists and community organizers like revealed to the public these plans for Cop City. But it does also point to something very interesting, that the state is connecting the dots between the George Floyd rebellion and Stop Cop City, defending the Atlanta forest. And like in some ways, in terms of like a thought through line, it is true because, you know, George Floyd rebellion happened because a pig murdered a Black human being, and the largest uprising in decades occurred on the subject of police. And instead, what we got in response was politicians wearing kente cloth and kneeling in the Capitol building, and police budgets going up, like skyrocketing. And now we're having like proposed cop cities all over, not just in Atlanta, right, where we're struggling right now. In Sandy Springs, a town north of Atlanta, in Henry County, which is part of the Atlanta metro area in Georgia, in Pittsburgh, in San Mateo, in California, in Baltimore. I mean, even Hawaii like had a cop city proposal that was shut down, right, recently. Awesome stuff. But yeah, it points to like the state sees the Stop Cop City movement and therefore George Floyd as a fundamental threat to its standing, right? So what do you do in response? Instead of like funding schools, you know, instead of like, you know, funding libraries, instead of like, you know, having essential services such as like the COVID Medicare stuff that was like cut, right? All these kind of programs that actually help with social well-being. They're just giving money to cops. Like in NYC, we see like services being cut. YPD gets robots and stuff, right? So, you know, it's just part of this pattern. So as organizers, we also need to acknowledge this. And as people in general, you don't even have to be an organizer. As people in general, we have to recognize that the Stop Cop City movement is part of the legacy of George Floyd in terms of a through line. But factually speaking, it's not true in the sense that the movement started when George Floyd was murdered. That's not true. But the state is basically trying to connect all these dots and put it part of the conspiracy, and therefore charge people that were probably, you know, probably or probably not involved with George Floyd uprising stuff to the defend the Atlanta forest stuff. Again, part of the kind of create this web of conspiracy. And lastly, and I know I've been talking a lot, so if you have any questions on this, but lastly, another thing to mention is just, you know, that when it comes to the RICO charge, it's a direct response to how the state has struggled to contain this movement. Again, the way that they frame this is that this is one kind of centralized or with a leader. Like I remember during the direct domestic terrorism indictments that the one, I think it was the AG, but it was someone related to like the legal side of things, was claiming that the leader doesn't enter the forest, which for one, we have no central leader. Like there isn't like the CEO of Stop Cop City, you know, and it's bullshit. But that also shows how the state doesn't understand a decentralized horizontal autonomous movement, right? And RICO is like their best like shot at trying to contain this movement, because right now they're targeting like infrastructure, you know, the Atlanta Solidarity Fund. They're targeting, you know, the fact that we have like a robust reimbursements like system of sorts, right? Or at least that they're claiming, right? That they're targeting specific things that give the movement, you know, a chance to have, again, like critical infrastructure, right? So that's what kind of the state is doing right now. And by kind of labeling this as a centralized org and labeling this as some kind of conspiracy, what they're also doing in trying to contain the movement, they're also like I said earlier, trying to like criminalize just movement work in general. Like a bail fund isn't a conspiracy thing. Like mutual aid isn't a conspiracy thing. Solidarity, like giving a fuck about other folks, isn't like a conspiratorial thing. But that's what the state is at right now. They're desperate, you know? And it speaks to like the level that the state is in right now.
Yeah, thank you for all of that context. I think that's really important. And also I like what you that you pointed out, the decentralized aspect, because I think being a history nerd, if you look back at movements that have had a clear figurehead, it's super easy to pick off that figurehead, and then the movement scrambles and it's very disorganized. But if you don't have a singular leader, it is so much more difficult. And as you pointed out, that's why you would just have to throw a bunch of RICO and terrorism charges at people, because you're like, well, I have no central person to go after, so I'm just going to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And that leads me to the next point. What is the feeling with folks with regards to, is this going to stick? Because I remember I spoke with Stephen Donziger, who's a legal expert, about the terrorism charges, and he was like, oh, that they're not going to stick, but that's not the point. The point is to scare people and to get them to sit down and shut up. What is the feeling with these RICO charges with regards to the folks who are facing them?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for everyone in the movement, but the general feeling is this is ridiculous, right? Like the overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy is kind of like a meme now, because it's just ridiculous, you know? Like people were being connected to RICO for like getting a reimbursement for buying glue, like art supplies, like getting gas money, like it's almost like farce how ridiculous this is. But that being said, I mean, look, one could say that like, oh, these charges won't stick, you know, whatever. But there's a history of like RICO being used in movement stuff, and there's a history of like serious charges in general being used in movement work in general. I mean, we could talk about like, you know, the Dakota Access Pipeline stuff, right? The goal isn't to like try to get 61 people or even 30 people under domestic terrorism or RICO. The goal is, yes, the fear, but then also to put the full weight of the state onto a few individuals too, right? That's something we have to acknowledge as well. It's like, you know, we know it's ridiculous. We know that these charges shouldn't stick, but we should also acknowledge that the state, again, is enacting bits of violence themselves, you know? I mean, it comes in scales, right? It's either assassination, like what happened to Tortuguita, right? Or it's like literally fucking up people's lives through these kind of things, like have these things looming over people. So it, whether it sticks or doesn't, it's still like a form of violence, right? And it's still like, you know, affecting people's lives. And sure, maybe 95% or 99% of people's charges won't stick, but there's a possibility that one or two people will get the full brunt of the law. And that's enough for me, at least, to be like, yeah, this is serious, regardless of the odds that it will stick or not. And another thing to consider is like, yeah, it's the fear element. And to be honest with you, when the domestic terrorism charges first came through, like people were very nervous to do actions after that, because it's like, you know, I mean, people were freaking flyering where in the county where one of the Georgia State Patrol officers that murdered Tortuguita were living at, and they got freaking charged with domestic terrorism, you know? So it did have some kind of bone chilling effect on us. I think the RICO stuff, while still, you know, people are a little bit nervous and people are still trying to figure out what all this means, both as individuals and as organizers in general. it hasn't had that same effect. And we can see a great example of that with the action that happened like a few days after the RICO charges were announced, in which like 5 really brave organizers chained themselves to construction equipment on the side of Cop City and, you know, prevented construction for an hour and a half, right? And what's crazy about that is that they got charged with misdemeanors. Now, getting charged in general sucks, but in comparison to domestic terrorism, in comparison to RICO, like misdemeanor is pretty fucking solid, right? So in many ways, it kind of shows one, the state's like bluff that they were doing, right? To charge us with these serious charges, but it also shows like our own tenacity and our own bravery to continue pushing forward. I mean, still we got Block Cop City coming up. We still had this referendum going on despite all this kind of stuff going on. So, you know, the general mood of the movement, while, you know, laughing at this and acknowledging like, you know, this is serious stuff still, we're still pushing forward, because at the end of the day, like, we are fully clearly aware that the state is trying to like silence us in many different ways, not just with the RICO and the domestic terrorism, but we can even see that with the referendum stalling right now, which is nothing on the organizers there. It's the state is doing the stalling right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for for putting that in that through that lens, because I think that's important. I mean, again, if you look historically, there are lots of instances of people being harassed to the point of, you know, become like Huey P. Newton, for example, became, you know, addicted to drugs because of the harassment that he was getting from the state was so extreme that he sought solace in drugs. You know, Aaron Schwartz, for instance, killed himself because he was facing so much time in jail. I mean, even if you are not in a prison cell, the state has ways to mentally and emotionally push you over the edge. So I think that is important to highlight that. And with regards to the referendum, I wanted to ask about that, because it seemed like a few days ago there was some kind of vote by the Atlanta City Council. Okay, we're ordering you to vote to count these votes, and then that didn't happen. Like, what is going on with that situation?
Yeah, yeah. And one thing I will also mention to your previous point earlier too, like the whole like the state using legal bullshit to like stall movements out. I mean, we could see that with the IWW back in like the early 1910s, 1920s, you know, the free speech fights, right? In which people were being charged for just soapboxing, right? And, you know, how that really, you know, messed up the IWW, and like, again, the difference between centralized and decentralized kind of organizing, right? But I digress. But to answer your question with the referendum, yeah, it's kind of stalled out. So you know, the referendum folks on September 18th, I believe, you can correct me if that's the wrong date, submitted 114,000 signatures to the city clerk. The city has refused to start processing these signatures, in the sense that they will, you know, do the verification and go through that whole process of like verifying whether there's enough signatures for the referendum to become a election reality. There was an emergency injunction filed by the Stop Cop City referendum campaign, and to basically like start the process of verifying the signatures, despite this kind of legal kind of, what's the word I'm looking for, despite this kind of like legal confusion that's going on. That's not the word I was looking for, but you know, this kind of like stalling that's happening. And the judge denied that emergency injunction in the sense of basically telling the city of Atlanta to start verifying the signatures, but did have an interesting critique onto the city of Atlanta for basically saying, like, why did you lie and approve this in the first place? In short, the city of Atlanta, the city clerk, allowed the referendum to like happen in terms of the petition count to start, or the petition signature gathering to start. And now that we reached the end of the road, the city is like, well, I don't know. Maybe we don't allow this to happen. Or maybe we wait until the 60-day extension period ends, and that's when we start counting. The campaign wanted to do it earlier because they exceeded everybody's expectations and got 114,000 signatures in like 2-ish months. So right now that's what's kind of happening. The city is spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on legal fees and hiring, literally like anti-democratic lawyers to basically invalidate the referendum petition. As for like the city council doing this vote, that didn't happen. There was kind of some movement for city council members to initiate this referendum because they have the legal authority to do that. There's like two methods of doing it, whether either the city does it themselves through the city clerk, right? And I'm sure there might be some corrections here or some specificities that I'm missing out, but there's that method, and then there's the other method which city council can like have the vote basically and be like, hey, we're gonna initiate this referendum or whatever. None of that has happened. Instead, we saw the city council pass this basically this ordinance or this whatever, digitizing the signatures and then allowing those signatures with the names and addresses of people who signed the referendum to be accessed via open records requests. So the privacy of the people that signed the referendum are basically non-existent. One thing that should be noted that Kendra Sue Derby, who is part of the Atlantans for Safety and Atlantans for Effective Government, and part of the Dickens campaign, requested a fully signed petition through Gora, meaning that she was requesting all the information, unredacted, of who signed the signatures, where they live, what's their name, and everything. And it should be also noted that various media organizations also made that same request, like specific request that Kendra Sue Derby did. Sans Al Jazeera, which just requested the number of people that signed, just wanted a confirmation on the number. So that's like really troubling because it's another form, like I was kind of mentioning earlier with like the RICO and the domestic terrorism stuff, as another form of intimidation. Like the state right now is using processes, both mostly in the legal world, to intimidate people in movement, to intimidate people that are in the periphery of movement, right? 114,000 Atlantans signing a petition to stop Cop City means that there's a huge like number of people that are against this project. So how do you intimidate that? How do you intimidate 114,000 people? You say that, now anyone could look at your data, look at where you live, and that you signed the Stop Cop City thing, right? So there's that going on. There's some other details too I can talk about in a second, but I don't know if you had like any other questions on that piece.
Well, yeah. So basically, I'm a little confused about, and of course that's the idea, right? It's supposed to be confusing, but so the city council vote that was unanimous, that came across as a order to count these votes, was not basically. What was it, just for show, to be like, actually we're not that bad, or what was even the point of having a vote? That, I mean, did that vote do anything?
No, it didn't. That's the funny thing. Yeah, it really was symbolic in many ways, but the whole thing about digitizing it's typical with government. It's typical with the state. I mean, we saw this again, like with the George Floyd uprising. We had the George Floyd bill or something like that, right? Which basically was effectively like another police funding bill. We had all these things where we call the master bedroom no longer the master bedroom, but like the main bedroom, like all this BS to show that things are moving, but nothing's happening, right? We haven't fundamentally changed anything. As Joe Biden once said in a campaign a while back, right? I don't know if folks remember that line. Nothing will fundamentally change, right? And it's the same case here. Nothing has fundamentally changed. The petitions are not being counted right now, or the signatures are not being counted or verified right now. There's a possibility that the referendum might miss its November election goal, because the idea was that this would be in the November general election this year, but now it's a possibility that it could be pushed back to March, where it's primary season, which is like notably less turnout in general when it comes to elections like that. And yeah, I mean, okay, cool. We've digitized this information, but there was no stipulations that ensured the privacy of the people that signed this referendum. And that's a really fucked thing. Like even like so-called, or no, they're progressive. Let's be real about that. These so-called like progressive folks are saying, well, this is great. We did this, you know, you got Lilia Bakhtiari saying that, right? But in reality, it's not, because there was no protections made where there's some form of redaction to get those names and addresses off, you know, like fine, if people want to open records request, valid. I mean, that's what the movement's been doing with the APF, with the mayor's office, and all these other things. We have the right to access information, right? But at the same time, the state like shouldn't have the right to get information of people's like political opinions on something and like have access to their addresses and their names and stuff like that, because that just opens a door, you know, of whatever state actors want to do, or whatever other non-state actors want to do.
Yeah, it's thought crime. Totally.
Yeah.
Man, if Orwell could see us now.
I know, right?
He'd be like, wait, that's way beyond what I was talking about. So I'm also curious, because you mentioned, you know, the folks locking themselves down to equipment, and I know that Block Cop City is coming up in November, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about Block Cop City and what that's about, and also what, like, in terms of plans for the future. I mean, how much construction has already happened? How much, in terms of the call to action, how much of that is asking folks to be on the front lines in that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think one last thing. Sorry to go back to the referendum for a second, but one last thing to mention about the referendum. So Andre Dickens sent like a letter back to Raphael Warnock after Raphael Warnock asked for some clarifications on the referendum process. And I just want to throw some quotes here that shows Andre Dickens, you know, being his Trumpian self, right? He's claimed that this has been the most inclusive, transparent, and progressive process in the country, that Atlanta's procedures have been designed to maximize the ability of residents to use the referendum process while ensuring that anti-democratic operators don't abuse the process. Just want to say that's just, you know, one, it's a lie. It's not been transparent, as we just discussed. And two, the claim of anti-democratic operators is really kind of like pointing to this kind of like belief that, you know, anything that isn't done by him or done by normal state channels is this kind of anti-democratic stuff. Again, it points to this like, why did you commit these direct actions? Why do you, you know, occupy the forest? Why don't you have dialogue? Why don't you go through state channels? Well, people are going through state channels through the referendum, and we're still being labeled as anti-democratic here.
Which is funny, because they're anti-democratic in their stonewalling of your attempt to use proper channels.
Yeah, it's projection. It's projection, you know? And yeah, it's insane. Like this kind of like Andre Dickens referring to signature gathering is vastly different from voting in this letter to Raphael Warnock. It's like, again, it's this kind of like, it's like what Trump did before the 2020 election, saying, you know, I don't know about these mail-in ballots. These could be fake ballots. You know, immigrants, they're voting, you know, and they're not citizens. So that's weird. And it's the same kind of fascistic logic that is starting to become normalized, right? We see this with Andre Dickens. We see this with a lot of mayors across the country. We see this with state governors across the country. And we even see shades of that with Biden, right? So again, all these kind of distorting reality and just like saying one thing and doing another. It's very normalized now. It's not normal. It shouldn't be, but it is, because that's what the state does, especially like post 2020. But yeah, sorry, Block Cop City, right, to your question. So yeah, basically, just to give a general overview, Block Cop City is a non-violent direct action that will occur on the site of Cop City to stop construction. The idea is to get thousands of people to basically get into the site of Cop City and do like a kind of like people's injunction to stop the stop work order, basically. Kind of very similar to what those 5 activists did, right? But in a larger scale. And basically it's this question of like, okay, we tried the legal channels, we occupied the forest for about 2 years, we got a martyr out of that, unfortunately. um what now? Like where do we go from here? The referendum, as previously mentioned, has been stalled out by no fault of anyone's own, other than the state, other than like, Andre Dickens and Governor Kemp and all these other actors. So what do we do now? um and this is kind of an answer to that, right? The idea is to go on a 70 city tour across the continent, across the nation, um, informing people what's going on, encouraging people to come through, and to help us, because right now Atlanta is under a lot of pressure, just both as organizers and just as a city in general. And we need help. So it's kind of like a call to action nationwide. It's like, you've heard about Cop City in the news, you've heard of ACPC reporting on this. It could happen here reporting on this, Unicorn Riot reporting on this, other channels reporting on this. What are you going to do now? Because as mentioned previously, like, we're seeing cop cities everywhere now, right? Pittsburgh, Sandy Springs, Henry County, Baltimore, right? North Texas at one point. Chicago has its cop academy, right? So we're seeing this trend here. What are y'all gonna do about it? And it's not like in a shady way. It's just true. What are you gonna do about it, right? And there's also plans to have like a local Atlanta info tour as well, to just get people to come through locally too, because it's, again, like, this is both like a local and a national movement. And I think any politician, any reactionary, anyone that's against the movement to stop Cop City is disingenuous, and they say that this is like an outside agitator thing that's happening in Atlanta. And there was that one racist that told I think it was like the head of the Georgia Working Families Party, who is Asian American, to go back to her country. Like, we're dealing with that, right? So all this to say, it's like, you know, look at yourselves. Like, y'all are building Cop City, y'all building Cop Cities, and the people that are going to be coming to Cop City, like 40% of which thereabouts will be from out of town, and not even in that, or out of the state rather. And even that, there's not a percentage that's included that we're having city and local agents, police agencies coming to Atlanta to get trained as well. So I mean, if anything, they're the outside agitators, right? So all that said, is like with Black Ops City, it's kind of like nonviolent direct action, like really put get there, put our bodies on the line, because again, like, we've tried all these channels and they're denying and denying and denying. So what else are we gonna do? So yeah, the Block Hop City thing is gonna be like a whole weekend. It's kind of like a weekend of action, like similar to the weeks of action that occur. So November 13th is going to be the day, and then during that weekend, there's going to be, kind of a build up to that, getting people together, having community stuff, but also getting ourselves ready for this thing. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, I believe that's blockcopcity.org, correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah, blockhopcity.org. There'll be more information posted as the date gets closer, but there is a good bit of information already out there.
Awesome. Well, Palta, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us and giving us all of this important context, because of course this is context that you will never hear on corporate media. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
No, 100%. Thank you for organizing this interview, and thank you for having your interest in this topic and, reporting on what's going on. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.